This is Dr. George. This is Citizens Gone Wild. And let's talk about some things. Some things that I am rather eternally interested in is anti-Semitism. And I'd like your expertise as to what is and what is not anti-Semitism. Lately, this was in the news because Trevor Noah, who's now in charge of the Daily Show, kind of a comedy slash news show, has come out and it criticized Israel for the way it acted during the recent war between Israel and Hamas, the terrorist organization that controls the Gaza Strip. And he, like many others in the mainstream media and the cable networks as well, thought that Israel, they were very kind. They said Israel has a right to exist. Very nice of them. And then they said that Israel was overdoing it. That is, they had bombed a little bit. They should stop. They said they had already killed some Palestinian children. They implied that it was done deliberately. And they said that Israel is so powerful, it shouldn't go all out when it fights the Palestinians who are trying to basically annihilate them and destroy the state of Israel. So I thought I'd back off a little bit and go to the what is called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And it gives an example here, which I'm going to read directly. Applying double standards by requiring of it, Israel, a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. I don't recall many nations that were criticized for overdoing it when they defended themselves against someone who was trying to basically annihilate them. Trevor Noah is a very popular figure. He's on the Daily Show. He's black. And he got on the air and he told a story from his childhood, which he is fond of doing, and rightly so. And he said that when he got into a fight with his little brother and was beating him up, his mother would say, "Look, Noah, be the bigger man. You're more powerful, you know it. Stop the fighting. And if he continues to hit you, just be the bigger man and put up with it." And this ties into the question of what is anti-Semitic or not, because it basically says, what I say is that whenever Israel is under threat or when they're in a war, the main thing that seems to worry the enemies of Israel is that Israel is winning. And this seems to annoy people. And in all the mainstream media reports, ABC, CBS, the cable networks, all except Fox, they always mention that the Israeli bombs had killed children. This is something new in the world. During World War II, for example, we used to drop bombs on Germany. They were called blockbusters. They contained 10,000 pounds of explosives, and they would literally kill every item, everyone who was on a square block. We didn't worry that much about overdoing it then. And we don't seem to worry too much about overdoing anything except when Israel successfully defends itself. I personally think this is a wonderful development in the world. I like it much, much better when Israel can defend itself successfully than I liked it when we were helpless and in concentration camps. And I wish people would make up their minds. They didn't like it when we were murdered in concentration camp. We were too passive then, people said. All right, and now we're too active. So if you've got a magical machine that tells Jews exactly how much force they should use, send it in. We can always use something like that. Trevor Noah has repeatedly been critical of Israel and of Jews. He almost didn't get the job in America because there were rumors of his anti-Semitism even before he left South Africa to come to America. But that was smoothed over and he got on the air. And now he seems to be reviving his memories of ideas that he gained from childhood adventures and applying them to international events. Again, people seem so unhappy that Israel was able to defend itself using what I certainly hope was overwhelming force. I thought overwhelming force was good when used by good people. It was overwhelming force that helped Grant defeat the Confederacy. And that's a good thing because it ultimately ended slavery, right? And I think overwhelming force was good in World War II, where it helped us defeat Germany and Japan. It's good, good, good. And I think overwhelming force is what has kept us alive these years when we were in competition with the communist bloc. And they had stuff that kills, and we had more stuff that kills. And that's a good thing because eventually they were unable to keep up with us in the area of stuff that kills people. And it sounds terrible, but it's a good thing, I think. Maybe it doesn't sound terrible. It only sounds terrible if you didn't want to see us win and if you don't like to see Jews successfully defending themselves. I thought you'd be up standing on top of chairs, standing on the roofs, cheering the Jews on. At last, Jews are in a position to defend themselves, but apparently not. Apparently not. Most of the media, practically all of it, emphasized the number of children who were killed. They did this in spite of knowing that no nation on earth in the history of this planet have ever done more to protect civilians. We go out of our way to protect civilians, if I may use the we when I talk about Jews in Israel. Israel actually takes measures that no other nation on earth in the history of earth takes. For example, if the Palestinians put their bombs and their missiles in the basement of hospitals, apartment buildings, and regular homes. That way they know that if they're destroyed by Israeli bombs, then they'll be able to say, look, you killed, you destroyed a hospital. And they're always looking for something they can use as propaganda, and that's propaganda. They know darn well that Israel bombed that place, not because it's a hospital, but because you have bombs in the basement there. You move the bombs out, we'll stop bombing the hospital. And this happens continuously. These are some of the things that Israel goes to greater length than any other country in the history of the world to avoid killing civilians. Before, for example, they bomb an apartment house that has missiles or soldiers in the basement. They actually call up the people in the building and say, get out, we're about to bomb the building. And of course, the bad guys also get out at that point. And Israel misses the opportunity to kill the bad guys, the enemy soldiers, but it also doesn't want to kill the patients in the hospital or the people that are living peacefully in the apartment house. They also use other methods. For example, they will place a small bomb, almost like a giant firecracker, on the roof of a building that they're about to bomb, as a way of warning the civilians to get out. Who does that? No one does that except Israel. And for doing that, they are reprimanded and criticized viciously by nincompoops like Trevor Noah. But let's move on to happier topics. The child care paradox. This shows you how hard it is to solve problems in politics. We all get mad and say, oh, the people in Washington are no good. Well, maybe they aren't any good, but they have insurmountable problems. For example, here's the crazy thing. It now costs around $12,000 a year for a family to put their children in daycare, let's say when they're 1 year old or 2 year old or 3 years old, okay? But the people taking care of our children, of our grandchildren, only get about $10, $12 an hour. And this is the rotten situation we're in here. What should we do? I happen to think the government should step in and help out here, either by supplementing the pay of child care workers, or by giving more money to the families that need child care, and they can then give the money to a child care center. It's a very difficult problem. And we can all sit here and yell at the people in Washington, but my question for you is, okay, hotshot, what would you do? Once the mainstream media decides on who the bad guys and who the good guys, that's it. They will run that string all the way out. They have quite a problem here with what is currently being revealed about the Indian healthcare services. It turns out that there were many Indians that had slaves. All right, then slavery ends. And then what? Well, it turns out that the Indians are treating the blacks, who were formerly slaves, very, very poorly. For a while, they weren't even letting the blacks access health care. The federal government supplies health care to the Indians, but the Indians are in charge, and they weren't letting the blacks in. Now they apparently have been embarrassed, and they're going to let them in there. It's just a sad situation here. And it turns out there are other bad guys other than white people. You know, if you read the paper on a daily basis, you're bound to get depressed before you step out and get your first cup of coffee. We have left Afghanistan. Years ago, I was taking a taxi in New York City, and the driver was an Afghanistani who's now an American. And we started talking, and he said, listen, all of the money you're sending over there, or a lot of it, it's in American banks already. And I was a little skeptical, but here it turns out, look, the son of Afghanistan's former defense minister bought a house for $20.9 million Beverly Hills, for $29 million, for $21 million, that's rounded off. So the guy who is the son of Afghanistan's former defense minister got a hold of a lot of money. I don't know if he's a good saver or if he worked nights, perhaps on weekends for extra money, but he managed to save at least 21 million that he could use for his house. I don't know how much the furnishings are, but it's nice to see a good saver making good. These things happen in wars. I understand that. But couldn't our government take a little look around? Couldn't it investigate? Couldn't it pull this guy in and say, where the hell did you get the money from? And if these are ill-gotten gains, which they surely are, there are very few jobs in Afghanistan that pay $20.9 million. We should take the money away from them, just confiscate it. Why don't we do a nationwide search of banks and tell the banks, look, if you have a large sum of money that was put there by someone from Afghanistan, let us know and we'll come and investigate. We just don't do anything about these scandals. It is so discouraging. Here's another thing that's discouraging, by the way. Lately, the woke folks have decided that there's something called gender fluidity. And they've had doctors who were criticized because they said bad things like only women can give birth to children. And here's something, they also cancel or censor language. Ruth Bader Ginsburg made a comment where she used the word woman, and she's not supposed to. She said that only women can give birth, and that's obviously false according to the politically correct. And so the American Civil Liberties Union actually censored Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They crossed out the word or the comment that she had made that only women can give birth to children. And of course, they were embarrassed by when word got out about this. What they said is that they're going to use the word woman by saying that the term reflects the identity of the majority of people who might seek an abortion. Those are their words. Things have gotten pretty damn silly when the ACLU, which is supposed to be the champion of free speech, censors language suggesting what is obvious to most people on this planet, that only women give birth to children. And to censor Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's an idol, a legend, a fighter for women, is just beyond belief. If you've ever wondered why is it so darn hard to get anything done in Washington, D.C., well, I'll tell you why. Currently, there are 4,000 lobbyists in Washington right now trying to influence legislation. For example, there's a move to have competition in the pricing of drugs that are sold to the government, which would lower the price of drugs. Currently, their prices are fixed. And we thought this is a capitalist system, drugs are important. Why don't we have price competition? It seems obvious. There are 4,000 lobbyists, and I can assure you that a huge chunk of those lobbyists are working for the pharmaceutical industry, and they have a lot more money than you do, Bobby. So we'll see if anyone alters this situation and allows price competition for drugs.